Hi, everyone. We'll get started shortly. We're just gonna see if a few more people join us because it should be a decent sized crowd tonight. Let's give another minute or two and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. So we'll get started, and anybody else who comes in, we'll let into the room. Welcome to tonight's webinar. For those of you who have not been to one of these before or don't know who I am Chris Baskis, the Club Relations and Membership Manager with Ontario Cycling. Each season, we host a number of these type of education information webinars, usually for the club directors, but the goal this year is to do some more uh, kind of direct to the membership. This one we do every year. It's basically just an overview of the insurance program for the upcoming season. Um, so with all of our webinar opportunities, we're trying to bring in experts from the various sectors or industries, so you're getting the most accurate and thorough information that you can get. Before we want to get started, I want to let everybody know that tonight's webinar is being recorded and will be available on Ontario Cycling's YouTube page, probably Friday, maybe Monday. But you can also check it out there if there's anything you missed tonight, or you can just email me and I can also send you the file link as well. Um, I ask that everybody please remain on mute during the presentation tonight. This will ensure that everybody can hear the presentation, hear the speaker. But if you do have a question throughout um, the evening, you may either use the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen or simply type the question into the chat and we will be sure to get to it. You're welcome to have your camera on, or if you want to keep your camera off and then ask when you put it on when you ask your question, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Next, I want to acknowledge that I'm hosting tonight's webinar from the Ottawa region, which is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. I recognize the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries, and I honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory. On behalf of Ontario Cycling, we extend our deepest respect to all First Nations people, both past and present, as the custodians of the beautiful land that we reside on. So as mentioned, tonight's topic is on the annual insurance program that Ontario Cycling is a part of with a number of other provinces, including our national federation as well, Cycling Canada, or under the Cycling Canada banner. Tonight's webinar hopefully will give you a better understanding of the insurance benefit that you get with membership and some of the additional options that you can purchase as a member, whether that be additional sport accident or travel medical coverage, amongst a few others. Tonight's guest speaker is Brent Brandom. He is the Senior Vice President, Sports and Entertainment for Gallagher. and also has an extensive background, having worked alongside numerous provincial sport organizations, and is in fact himself on the board of directors of Skate Ontario. So without further ado, I will pass you off to Brent, and I will keep an eye on the chat if there's any questions. A number of you may have sent in questions in advance of this, and I appreciate that. We will save those till the Q&A at the end. But if you do have a question throughout, about the topic that we're talking about, please feel free to either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try and get to it. Thanks. On to you, Brent.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks everybody on the call for taking the time today and giving up an evening to talk about insurance. I know everyone gets very excited to talk about that. So just going to do a overview of what is included for the members with your Ontario Cycling membership. Then we're also going to run through a little bit of the kind of optional add-ons that are available. They're not automatically included, but they are available to be bought. A bit of an explanation on how the policies work and some claim examples. And then we'll get into your questions. I do often find that is the biggest section of these presentations because everyone's got questions. So starting off with the core program, the core program consists of two major pieces. The first of which is commercial general liability, referred to here as GL. This is what protects you as members, the clubs, the province, the national federation, from lawsuits arising out of bodily injury or third-party property damage claims. So somebody gets hurt, they file a lawsuit, they're going to name everybody they can think of. Very rarely does only one person or one entity get sued these days. It's multiple people, multiple organizations being sued. And this can include, and we have seen in the case of a collision, individual cyclists being named in these lawsuits, as well as the club, the province, the national federation. And the good news here is that the liability policy will cover all of those people I just mentioned and defend them from these lawsuits. So there is a $10 million general limit per occurrence. There is no general aggregate. So we can have as many $10 million claims as we want without running out of coverage. I do not recommend it, but you could. And then some sublimits under the general liability there is a $2 million professional liability limit, sometimes referred to as errors and omissions. This is the coverage that's going to be most applicable to coaches and ride leaders, where you might not be directly responsible for the bodily injury, but you get dragged in because you plan the route, you plan the ride, and if the allegation is that you made an error in doing so, you planned a dangerous route or you disobeyed traffic signals, whatever the allegation might be, that's where the professional liability might come in. And then a $2 million abuse liability limit. This covers the organization as well as coaches from allegations of sexual abuse, harassment, molestation, verbal abuse. Those very unpleasant topics that have unfortunately become more common in sport. The second piece of the core program is a sport accident policy, sometimes also called AD&D, which is short for accidental death and dismemberment. So probably not too hard to figure out why the marketing teams started calling it sport accident. This also responds to injuries, bodily injury, somebody gets hurt during a ride. Where it differs from the general liability is how the policy is triggered. So for the general liability policy to be triggered, there needs to be an allegation of fault or negligence on the part of somebody else and legal action taken. The sport accident policy doesn't really care who's at fault. It's triggered by the injury itself. And it pays out on a set schedule of benefits. Most of these are medical expenses reimbursements. And it is excess of provincial health care. So a rider's injured, they need medical attention. OHIP is going to cover a certain portion of that. What's not covered by OHIP expenses over and above that will be picked up by the sport accident policy. As you can imagine, some of the most common types of claims we see here on the sport accident are things like physiotherapy and dental. So it's also tends to go after whatever kind of work benefits you may have for yourself. So if you've got a dental plan through your work that covers 80%, you could claim the remaining 20 under the sport accident policy here if you require dental work as the result of an accident. It's very important to note, and I'll go to the next slide too, because I think this is going to get into that. Oh, we're going into the claims process next. One previous note on the core program is that it applies to members during sanctioned activity. And that sanctioned activity is a theme that's going to run pretty consistently throughout this. So sanctioned activity would include any sort of races or events that are sanctioned by Ontario Cycling, as well as your kind of regularly scheduled club rides are also going to be sanctioned activity. If you have questions about what is or isn't sanctioned, I encourage you to reach out to Chris.
Yeah,
Chris, I saw you had muted yourself. Are you adding in there?
yeah, so just to go back to the previous slide, so the general liability section has the $10 million bodily injury. So this year, what Ontario Cycling did, based on some feedback from clubs and some members, is we changed our membership structure around. And in doing that with the community membership, which some of you probably have, it does have a different threshold in terms of the liability and the sport accident coverage. So it does have a $5 million bodily injury coverage instead of the 10 million. And the sport accident isn't included in the base. We will kind of bring up a section on the personal training options that you can get, or personal training accident coverage that you can get. And you can add that to your community membership if you feel that you need the sport accident coverage. That would cover you for both sanctioned activities by clubs, as well as your own personal training or riding, depending on the option you choose. But just pointing out that that's one change that we have for this year. But basically the challenge, compete, and UCI license memberships all get kind of what's on this slide, the 10 million plus the sport accident during sanctioned activities. So during club activities, team activities, races, that type of stuff that are sanctioned by Ontario Cycling, or another body within the program. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that before we kind of dive too deep. And I'm sure we can ask more questions about stuff, and everything will tie in at the end. So.
Thank you for that clarification, Chris. That's important. I also do see I see some numbers in the chat box there. Should we maybe tackle those before we move on to the claims process?
I think it was just confirming audio for some people. Okay. Just making sure that everybody could hear you. Nobody truly needs to hear me. You're the important one tonight. Yeah.
Fair enough. So driving on to the sport accident claims process, obviously, we would rather see sport accident claims than general liability claims. This is one of the other benefits of a sport accident policy is oftentimes if an injured party gets some of their out-of-pocket medical expenses reimbursed, that does make them less likely to sue. Sport accident, because you don't need to pay for lawyers in a sport accident claim, they tend to be smaller, which benefits the association by having the claims be under control, helps control insurance costs, which in turn helps provide stability on membership dues. So that's why we encourage this. If you are injured, make a sport accident claim. Don't sue, please. This is how you go about making a sport accident claim. Is immediately after the incident, submit a sport injury report form or an incident report. So that can be found on the Ontario Cycling website, and that must be received within 30 days of the incident to be eligible for a sport accident claim. So all you're really doing there is reserving the right to make a claim under the sport accident. So fill out the report form, let Ontario Cycling know that you've been injured. They will let us know, and we will file that away for if you do choose to make a claim down the road. After you've done the sport injury report form and you start undertaking medical expenses, that's when you contact the Ontario Cycling office for a sport accident claim form. So once you've actually had some out-of-pocket expenses, that's when it becomes a claim rather than just an incident. Submit that sport accident claim form to Ontario Cycling. They report it to Gallagher. They confirm to us that it was a sanctioned event or you had one of the optional buy-ups to provide coverage for non-sanctioned activity. And then we will report it to the insurance company, who will make contact to arrange claim payment. We excuse me, sorry. If for those on this call who have been through the claim process before, the previous insurer was in London, England, and that did lead to some delays in claim payment. There is a new insurance company on the program this year that is based here in Canada, and so and part of that change was to help improve this process and get people making claims paid back in a much more timely fashion. So we're very confident that the timeliness of claim payments is going to improve significantly this year. And if they don't, let us know so we can yell at insurance companies to get better. Moving on from the claims process, unless there are questions, sorry. Chris,
Yeah, so there's just a question about who the carrier is that the program's through this year.
So it's been moved to Markel Canada. Markel is a big player in the sports insurance world in Canada and works with a number of provincial and national sporting bodies.
Perfect. And Brian, I'll get to your question at the end because it's one of the questions that have been brought up kind of previously. So we'll answer that in the Q&A just so that we can kind of keep on with the rest of the presentation, but I will circle back to that question.
So continuing on with kind of the core programming. So I mentioned that the core program coverage applies to sanctioned activity only. So we'll get into options for if you're doing personal training rides or individual training rides that are not considered sanctioned activity, how you would get some coverage for those. But the core insurance program is for sanctioned activity only, which leads me into kind of the importance of following the Cycling Ontario Safe Sport protocols and the sanctioning guidelines. It has been warranted to us by Ontario Cycling that for sanctioned activity, certain risk management measures are being taken, and these are communicated to the clubs in terms of best practices. And we've warranted to the insurance company that these risk management measures are being taken to make sure these rides are being done as safely as possible. Every insurance policy out there contains a misrepresentation clause, which means that, you know, if you've provided false information to the insurance company, that's basically an out for the insurance company on paying the claim. So it is important to make sure that, I mean, this is probably more for the clubs than the individual members to be worried about this, but it is important to be following these safe sport protocols because you're potentially jeopardizing coverage if you're not. We do have coverage for the use of e-bikes under the core programming. The requirements follow Ontario law of the e-bikes must be pedal assisted. They can't be fully motorized and the max speed of 32 kilometers an hour. If it's a fully motorized e-bike, then the insurance companies consider that a motorcycle and you need an auto policy. But for pedal assisted e-bikes, we are able to include the use of those in the main coverage. And finally, liquor liability. Again, more a concern for the clubs to worry about, I think, Chris, than any individual member. But if the rides have any sort of, if they end at a bar or if there is any sort of beer gardens at these events, any sort of formal social aspect to an event that has alcohol served, we need to add liquor liability to the policy for those events. And that can be done pretty straightforward. I think it's a flat $250 per event, but it needs to be added or else anything arising out of liquor would not be covered by the policy without that add-on for that particular event. And we've seen an unfortunate rise in other sports, not cycling so much, but in other sports where an athlete has there's been a social event or an athlete has tailgated in the parking lot, got into an accident while under the influence, and the sport organization is looped into the resulting liability lawsuit as, you know, you're the reason why they're there in the first place. So it's silly to have a claims experience blown up for something that doesn't involve the actual sport. You know, if we're going to have some claims on this program because there's so many cyclists in Ontario, but we'd rather those claims come from actual cycling activity than from liquor because, you know, that's what we're all actually here for. So important to do those liquor aspects with care and to make sure that we add the cover appropriately so that the coverage is there if we do that.
There's just a question in the chat about kind of a sanctioned event, and in the case of, you know, a club or whatnot, if a ride leader doesn't show up for a ride, can the ride continue and still be considered sanctioned and all riders covered for insurance? I would say you're best not to do that. There's a reason why you're training people, or why clubs get people trained as a ride leader. What I would suggest clubs do is either have a ride leader in place and have a designate that might be at the activity who's trained, to kind of fill in if that person doesn't show up. But ultimately, you know, from a club perspective, if I'm training people to be a ride leader and then that person doesn't show up, I'm really just letting anybody in the club run the activity, or nobody's in charge, which could be even worse, because then there's all can be all sorts of hecticness. So what I would suggest to clubs from a risk management standpoint is, and I've done this, train as many people as possible, even if they don't necessarily ever are the lead person. At least you've got backups for every activity. So again, in those situations where nobody shows up, I would say that Ontario Cycling would likely not sanction that activity, just because most club guidelines, if not all, say that it will be led by a ride leader. And so, you know, if it's not, again, to Brent's point, you're not really following your own guidelines, which then get into that iffy area. If anybody ever files a legal claim, that did you follow the policy that you communicate out to members and that you communicate out publicly? So hopefully that answered your question, Mark. But if not, feel free to reach back out to me, or put a a variation in the chat.
Thank you, Chris, and well answered. So now we're going on to we've talked about with the core program and what is included in your membership. Now let's talk about what else can you get? Because they're obviously, the core coverage is limited to sanctioned activity. So we do have two options to expand the sport accident, the medical benefits cover, to non-sanctioned rides. There's two levels of coverage. The first one is kind of individual training. So you're going out, you're riding on your own, you're not with your club. You're just going on a training exercise ride there. The real key to this one is that you're still using the bike as sports equipment rather than a vehicle. So the purpose of the ride is for exercise or training purposes. There's that level of sport accident expansion, and then we can expand it even further to any time on the bike. So that would include even times when you are using the bike as a vehicle rather than sports equipment, like if you're commuting to work, if you're going to the store. Anytime on the bike means anytime on the bike. So as you can imagine, that one's a little bit more expensive than the individual training ride, because particularly around the insurance companies do not like the commuting exposure. That was a battle in order to get that option included. I think we only had the individual training option for a year or two before we managed to even get the anytime on the bike. But they see that as significantly increased risk, and therefore a much higher cost on the buy up there. But those are the two levels of buy up, and that's where we can expand the sport accident. The other key one is to know about is the travel medical. I've put leaving Ontario here, but that really probably should be better as leaving Canada. If you're leaving Ontario but you're still within Canada, the sport accident does include some out of province medical coverage. So the sport accident is still going to be there if you're leaving Ontario for a sanctioned event, or if you have the individual athlete buy up and you're leaving Ontario but staying within Canada, the sport accident will still be there. There is some out of province cover on the sport accident. If you're leaving the country, this is where you're going to need additional coverage. And I'm going to try to explain this in a little bit of a different way, because the way I've been trying to seems to just confuse people. The sport accident cover is not going to cover any medical expenses incurred outside of this country. So if you go down to the States and you get hurt and you end up in the hospital, there is no coverage for that under the sport accident. So you're on your own if you end up in a hospital in another country. What you can buy is what's called travel medical coverage. And you want to be careful when you're buying travel medical, because a common exclusion on a lot of travel medical policies is participation in sports activity. But there are travel medical policies that don't have that exclusion. Gallagher can help arrange this. We'd be more than happy to, although this is not intended to be a sales pitch. This is intended to be informational. You don't have to use us. But what I would encourage you is to make sure that that exclusion is not on your travel medical. But if you're leaving the country, I cannot recommend enough that you get travel medical coverage, because hospital bills in, well, particularly in the United States, but really anywhere, can get very expensive if you don't have insurance coverage. Chris, this slide seems to have generated some questions. So in the chat.
I've tried to answer some in the chat. So there was a question about the option A, or the sport accidents. Somebody asked, you know, would it cover them if they were riding home from a sanctioned ride, or riding from their home to a sanctioned ride and then back home? And then there's a few other ones. All the questions are coming into the chat. You guys don't want to audio any questions. There's a few questions about riding out of province. So I think we'll address that in the Q&A, because that was one of the questions that was brought up in advance.
Okay.
And then there was a question more so for the club. So I'll circle back to the question about kind of the club, but I'll go to the sport accident first. Yeah.
I'll tackle the first one, which riding to a club ride would be a time when you're really kind of using the bike as a vehicle. So the anytime on the bike expansion would certainly cover
that. So option B,
like you're either going to bike to a club ride or drive to a club ride, but you're taking a vehicle to a club ride. But the anytime on the bike would cover that for sure.
Yeah. And then there's a question about, does the club need to worry about insurance if they start and finish the ride at a local pub or brewery? So this goes kind of back to the liquor liability.
Yeah, we would certainly recommend getting the liquor liability add-on if you're having your club ride start or end. Well, I certainly wouldn't recommend starting a club ride at a local brewery, because you don't want people drinking and cycling. Ending at a local brewery, I would recommend getting the liquor liability add-on to that.
Yeah, I think there's some questions. So Les's question is about the sport accident coverage with a community member in a sanctioned ride. So again, the sport accident coverage doesn't automatically kick in with the community membership. You can buy the individual athlete buy-up that is mentioned here. So that would cover you for, you know, the activity itself or your own personal riding. Or you can get the challenge membership, which is the next level up. And that would include both the sport accident coverage for all sanctioned club rides or sanctioned events that you're doing, as well as a bump up in liability from 5 million to 10 million. So, if I miss a question, I'm going to try and circle back, but they're coming in so quickly. Yeah, so Mark has a question about with the again, this is more of a club question. You guys should have been at the club one last week to ask some of these. But in terms of designating official rides and where's this document? So Mark, basically what we did in our guidelines this year, and this was based on a lot of discussions with clubs over the last number of years about reporting activities. Essentially what we did this year is say, if clubs provide us a risk management plan and a ride guidelines document that we've reviewed, you know, sometimes we go back with updates to them, and then we basically say, hey, you know, this is approved, it will cover any recreational activity. So that's kind of the agreement that we have with the clubs this year, is recreational activities will be covered as long as they are following the risk management plan and the ride guidelines document that they submitted to us and approved. We do have a separate sort of policy for competitive activities. So there's a separate form that gets filled in for any competitive activities like a time trial, a pursuit, a crit, cyclocross race, mountain bike race, that type of stuff, gravel race. So that's a little bit different, where we actually have specific dates and whatnot. But for recreational activities, we wanted to really let the clubs have freedom to be able to say, hey, as long as we have the activity following everything that we've provided Ontario Cycling, you can have your activity. You don't have to tell us the specific date or day or hour or any of that stuff. So I'm gonna just try and keep going with the chat here. So just to go back to the sport accident, because I think what we've kind of discussed and what might have been said is a little different. So the sport accident option A, there have been people who have been taking that out to do their sanction activities, and we had told them, it would cover them for their sanction activities if they purchased that option A. If as a community member,
As a
um,
community member.
as a
As
community
if
member,
you have a main membership, you don't need it because sanction
yeah,
activities are
okay,
included.
okay. So hopefully that answers Dave's question. And then there's a question about the liquor add-on, the cost for that, and I'm just reading. Do you have to get that for each ride that ends at a pub or an annual fee? So that the liquor liability is a flat fee per activity or per occurrence. It's not a annual. There's not an
Yeah,
annual fee to
flat
cover
fee
all things,
per activity
and that's
or
the
per event.
250 that you mentioned. And basically, yeah. So it's recommended for if you end a ride at a pub, that you would purchase that again, especially if you have members that are going into the establishment in kit. It would be a lot easier for somebody to say, hey, I didn't necessarily know that that's where the club activity ended per se. But again, when it comes to liability, and the liability is kind of the insurance aspect of providing it, but from a non non-legal point of view, but semi-legal point of view, they're always going to tell you as an organization to kind of save your butt and make sure that you look into that, so that if something was to happen, that you're covered. So
Yeah, the flip side would be some sort of notice or disclaimer that is very clear that, you know, the activity is over and you are on your own time and doing all of that. That may not save you from getting named in the lawsuit, but um, you'd want to be incredibly clear that the actual, you know, sanctioned activity is over. And then, people are adults and can do what they want to do after the fact. But um, as Chris mentioned, people might still be in their kit. Like I would certainly recommend getting the liquor liability add-on.
and so the individual training, there's a question here about the cost. So the individual training one is $27 with Ontario Cycling, and the anytime on bike is 114. So that's kind of your base plus a processing fee built in. And basically once you do that, or you purchase that, and you can either purchase it when you get your membership, or if you want to, think about it and then get it after the fact, there's a way to just basically log into CCN Bikes and go straight to that kind of purchase option without having to go through the whole process again. You can add that, and as soon as you purchase that, we basically send updates to Gallagher with kind of a list of people, so that if anything was to happen, you would do kind of the same sport accident claim process and injury reporting process that you would or your club would for an activity. So you'd fill in an injury report, tell us, hey, I was on an individual ride or I was training or whatnot, and I was injured, got, God forbid, got hit by a car, or just, ran over a dog. All of these things have happened. And then we would, reach out to the broker, let them know that somebody was injured. And then if you have any medical expenses to claim, we'd go through that sport accident claim process of with you, of filling out the form, getting it over to Gallagher. And we tend to let Gallagher take over from that point once we've submitted the claim. But certainly, if you have any follow-ups, don't hesitate to either email me directly or include me on any communications. Like Brent said, the previous underwriter sometimes was a little slow on responding to things, so I had to get involved a few times. But yeah, we're hoping with Markel being more local that that'll be a much smoother process.
They've already been more responsive on general inquiries, so no reason to think the claim process won't improve as well. Looks like we're at the Q&A.
Perfect, because there's a lot of questions. So I'm going to go back to the questions that I have and try and loop them in with the ones that were there. So one of the questions that came in advance, all of these ones are ones that came in advance to start, because they might touch on some of the ones that are in the chat. So there's a question about event organizers and what coverage they would have versus, say, an individual who's riding with their club or whatnot.
So the event organizer is a member of Ontario Cycling, presumably,
Yes.
and it's a sanctioned event. So yeah, they would have the same liability coverage. Like the coverage is effectively the same. The professional liability may be more applicable, depending on the type of allegation made against the event organizer, but the coverage available would be the same. You would be covered. The event organizer would be covered as a member.
Perfect. So then there was a question about are we covered when we cross provincial boundaries for events or rides completely in another province? So I guess we'll touch on the are we covered, and then potentially the sport accident kind of ramifications and liability ramifications of that as well.
So assuming that the activity you're crossing the border for is a sanctioned activity, all of these answers are generally prefaced there, then yes, absolutely. The core insurance coverage would apply, the liability coverage would apply, as well as the sport accident. So if you have any expenses you have kind of in your home province would be the sport accident. And as mentioned, there is some out of province medical if you end up in a hospital or medical clinic in another province. Yes, absolutely for a sanctioned event. If it is a non-sanctioned event, if it's just an individual training ride or something like that, and you had the personal accident extension, you would still get the benefit of said personal accident extension, which, it's the same coverage. So it would still have that out of province benefit. If it's an unsanctioned event, then the liability would not. You'd be on your own or on your homeowners from a liability standpoint. Chris, you're muted.
It's been like 4 years of this and I still forget to unmute myself sometimes. I'm gonna just ask Maria to unmute because she has her hand raised. I don't want her to keep her
Very
hand up
politely.
forever. Oh, there's a question. She just sent it to me in the chat. So her question is basically, okay, so I guess this is a separate question. Maria, I'll loop you in with Brent directly on this one, just because it's talking about, sanctioning and whatnot as well. So we'll kind of circle back to that one after, if that works. Yeah, okay, perfect. I'm gonna go back to my questions. So many questions, which is good. So we've gone over the out of country coverage as well. There's a question about personal car, home, and health insurance. Would that cover any potential incidents involved during a club ride?
So yeah, I mean, health insurance presumably means OHIP and any sort of work plan that you have. OHIP obviously is going to respond to any injuries you have during an incident the same way it would. Your any sort of work benefits plan, it's really going to depend on the details of that work benefits plan. So I encourage you to contact your provider. However, probably like very, very good chance that it does. I am not a work benefits broker, but I'm not aware of a common exclusion for sports. So I would expect it. I would expect that too. In terms of your home and auto, again, really depends on the details of your actual policy. So I would encourage you to contact your broker and ask them that question.
There is a question about the coverage, the sport accident coverage over OHIP. So Brent and I actually talked about this just prior to the meeting. So we're hoping to have a schedule of benefits shortly. And what we can do is we can post that, I believe, a link to that on the Ontario Cycling website. All the insurance information that we get, we basically will post on the membership page. It's kind of, I think, towards the bottom of the page. Right now it still has, I think, 2023 listed somewhere. But you'll see a program summary there. You'll see the schedule of benefits for the sport accident listed there. And we'll also include an updated link to the new 2024 injury reporting form as well. So that can be your one-stop shop as well. We try and get the information, all the information to our clubs as well, so you can ask your club, and of course you can also just email our office or call our office, and we'll try and help you with any questions you have.
Yeah, we hope to get that from Markel very shortly, and we'll have the full schedule available. These things are usually the full schedule of sport accident benefits is often 9-10 pages long. So we tend to, on the summaries, we tend to hit the highlights. But we'll have a full schedule available shortly.
There was a question about trail building or trail maintenance.
So trail maintenance,
non-members. So
I think actually I don't know if we talked about this on the club one last week. We should have. So I apologize, Chris, if we didn't. Trail maintenance is an additional buy up option for clubs. So if you are engaging in trail maintenance activities, reach out to Ontario Cycling, and I think it's around $600, somewhere in that range. But we can add the liability coverage for trail maintenance activity for clubs. A much more streamlined approach with Markel than it was with London.
Does that include the use of machinery as well?
That does include the use of machinery, which is an improvement over last year.
And then somebody had a question about property damage. So it said, does the accident extension cover property damage, injury, and liability if riding alone on non-club rides? So I guess this is the clarification of what's covered under liability, what's covered under sport accident.
Yeah, so the extension to unsanctioned rides is the accident only in terms of that extension. So any sort of liability coverage, third-party property damage, or liability coverage is not part of that extension. You'd be looking to your homeowner's policy to respond from a liability standpoint on that front. It's just the sport accident medical benefits that are extended.
Just going through this. I'm going to go back. I'm going to see if I missed any questions, because I'm sure I miss questions all the time. Yeah, so Maria had a question about our officials or commissaires, as they tend to be known more in the cycling world. Are they covered at events or at sanctioned events while they're in that role?
Officials are certainly insured under the policy.
Perfect. So I'm gonna go back here. If anybody asked a question that I haven't in the chat that I haven't answered, please just resend it, because there are a bunch of things in the chat and I don't want to miss anybody's question. So I'm going to circle back to Brian's question from before about the community membership coverage change. So basically, and kind of working with our club advisory committee that was created last year and talking to a few clubs and talking to a few members, one of the things that came out from the clubs that we spoke to was being able to provide members more of an option to, in theory, opt out of the sport accident, because the clubs we spoke to felt like the vast majority of their members had some sort of coverage and were basically just paying for coverage that they may not use. Clearly, it's not it may not be the case for everybody, but basically based on that feedback, what we did was went back to Gallagher and to the rest of the provinces to try and find a scenario where members could purchase the membership without having that AD&D required, and then they could opt into it. So that was kind of the rationale behind it. Again, if your club is in a situation where the vast majority of people would rather see that brought back, let us know, because obviously feedback from the members and from the clubs is important every year when we kind of review insurance, when we review memberships and what went right, what went wrong. So I've had a few people email me already saying they might want to see a change next year. I'm more than happy to kind of talk with anybody, get their feelings on it. But as for right now, this was kind of the the route that we went based on the feedback that we had. But again, it's not to say it's perfect for everybody, and if other people have something they want to see, there's not to say that we can't make a change or make a modification in the future. So I think that's most of the questions. Like I said, if anybody has a question that I haven't answered, please let me know. I don't see any more in the chat. I hope I didn't miss one.
Chris,
Yes,
I
sorry.
wanted to ask a little bit about the 2024 try a ride and what that looks like this year.
Yeah, so basically there's two options. Thanks, Sean. What we do for anybody who's not aware, we provide clubs that are running activities through us the opportunity to host up to 10 tryout dates throughout the year. So basically those are pre-scheduled. Those are communicated to us in advance, but they're pre-scheduled dates where an individual can come out and basically try the club, see what it's like, and whatnot. So you don't have to have an OC membership to do that. You just have to basically, if you're the club, submit an application saying these are the dates, or you can do it date by date if you want. And the individual just goes to a Google form now. It's no longer on CCN. They go to a Google form. They just put in their name, email address, how they found out about it, fill out the waiver and concussion stuff that is always fun. And then they're good to participate. So that's option one. Absolutely no cost to the individual from Ontario Cycling to the club as well. The second option that we introduced last year based on some feedback is what we call the Club Day Pass. So that essentially, for anybody who's in the event side, is almost like a one day membership type of thing. Basically, the person will pay a fee. I believe it's $20 for adults, 15 for youth. And they can join any club recreational activity, so group ride, training ride, skill development, that type of stuff, for like any designated activity within the 3 days that they purchase that. So if I was to do it, I'd go on. Sorry, I don't like to talk this much. I'd go online, I'd purchase it. I would then show it to the club. They would see my card that I get. And if I decide to join the club after, contact OC and we basically credit you that fee. So essentially you'd pay $20 up front. And then if you want to join Ontario Cycling after, you get that $20 put towards your 2024 membership. Doesn't matter which membership it is, that'll get applied. Hopefully that answers your question, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
I tried to make it through that without coughing more than I thought I would.
Chris, it's Brian with a follow-up to your answer on the AD&D. Part of what I understood from the last call was that rationale was that it lowered the cost of membership for community members. Can you tell me what the premium or the membership was for a community member for OCA last year versus this year?
So thanks, Brian. So last year, the associate club membership would have been $51, and it would have seen an increase this year, is my guess. I'm gonna guess it probably would have been closer to 54, 55 this year. So this year it is the 45 plus. So again, it saves, it would save some people $10 if they if we had gone kind of the regular route, and they don't need the accident. If somebody does need the accident, they would purchase the additional sport accident coverage. But again, that would also include any of their personal riding that they may do as well. So
right. So to be clear, in terms of the option A, to get basically the same coverage as they had last year, they'll pay an additional $27 on top of the 45.
And it would include the personal riding accident coverage as well. So
well,
it's the sanction.
It's only for sanctioned at 27, is it not?
It would include your personal training as well. So like if let's say you went to ride with your club and then you decided on a Tuesday night you would go ride on your own and just go for a ride to train, your personal accident would cover you in that case too. So if you're personally training and something happens and you have a medical expense, submit the injury report and you would have that covered.
So that would that cover anything other than commuting?
I'll let
do-
Brent answer just to confirm because it's an insurance question, but
Yeah, really the differentiator between the anytime on the bus, the biggest one is commuting for certain. But it's really the differentiator that the insurance company is using is whether the bike is being used as sports equipment or as a vehicle. So it's really meant to cover training exercise rides. So, you know, something like going to so commuting obviously is using it as a vehicle, something like going to the store or running errands would be using it as a vehicle. That would need the anytime on the bike. But if you're just trying to go out for a ride and get some additional exercise, that's what option A is for.
Okay, that's great because I think the term training for some of the community members, they're just out recreational riding, but they're doing it for enjoyment and exercise, but it's a low key activity. So that would be covered within 27.
Yeah. So
it's good to be
hype them up, tell them they're training. That counts. What is training other than exercising and getting yourself in better shape? So so they're selling themselves short.
Some people have trouble understanding why the big difference for essentially was the same thing, but I can see the added benefit of it's an anytime recreational ride.
Yeah.
yeah, and like I said, Brian, definitely it's definitely a change. But again, if anybody at the club does have concerns about it, just don't hesitate to tell them to reach out to me. Because like I said before, feedback from the members and from the clubs is what we need to be better essentially, and be able to provide services to everybody. So
Thanks for that. It's just that we do have recreational riders who did make claims on that. And it was the entire club appreciated that in fact that was available in past years.
so I'll let I hope it's Therese. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
It is Therese. Thank you.
What's your question, Therese?
So my question is following up on Brian's question there. What about for those of us, who try to get our recreational training and stuff, on our leisurely rides and stuff on our way to work in the morning?
This is one that we get we've heard this argument a number of times, and I do understand it, but it's one that's been thoroughly rejected by the insurance company. They reject the notion that commuting is training. And the differential that they come back with is that you're using the bike as a vehicle to get to work. And certainly, commuting to work brings into the question of traffic, which is a very different risk profile than kind of a recreational exercise ride. So I hear you, and you're not the first to ask that one, but the insurance company has been pretty firm in their disagreement.
Okay, thank you.
There's two hands raised. I'll go to Andrew and then Karen, because I think that was the order that came up.
Awesome, thanks. And I'm not trying to loophole this, Brent. If somebody has so I'm a coach primarily. If somebody has a training ride prescribed to them by a coach, and I prescribe them 1 hour, then meet up with the group, the club ride, do 1 hour after the club ride. That's training by most definitions.
Yeah.
Would that then be covered under the option A?
Yeah.
Even though they still do meet up with the ride, or they meet up at the meeting point, but it is a training ride.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's the coach, I would absolutely consider that a training ride. I think, and the insurance company would agree there. Yeah, I absolutely. If you've got the coach saying, "Hey, you need the extra, go for an hour before or after the sanctioned ride," absolutely. That would be within option A. I agree with you.
Thanks.
So good loophole.
Sorry, Karen, my gosh, my mute is horrible.
Yeah, similar question and along the same lines, and I'm sorry if I'm just unclear or a bit confused, because I think the question was asked that anytime something happens on your way to a sanctioned ride or on the way home from a sanctioned ride, is that also under option A, or that's technically commuting?
Because when we spoke about it before, again, you know, kind of considered that or deemed that using the bike as a vehicle, and therefore kind of said option B. I think the big difference there from that general and what Andrew's saying is whether or not it's been kind of prescribed, for lack of a better term, by a coach as, hey, do this as training, although that opens up the whole gray area of what if your coach tells you to ride your bike to work in the morning. That's one I can seek more clarity on from the insurance company, is riding to a sanctioned event. I can certainly get a more clear answer on how the insurance company is going to interpret that. It's a fair question.
Yeah.
It's a fair question and a bit of a gray area, so we'll seek to clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, my view has been that that's the activity. It's the part of the activity is getting to the activity and getting back from the activity, but the entire thing is the activity as a sanctioned ride, I would imagine. But yeah, clarity would be.
We will see clarity on that. It's
Okay.
a fair question and one that we can get a better answer on. So
Okay.
Anne Marie had a question about accessing the videos from last week and this week's webinar. So the previous two webinars that we had were kind of more, the first one was more catered towards kind of the club side of the insurance. So it touches on a number of items we talked to today, but it kind of also went into more like club directors and officers coverage. And then another one was about policy. So if there's any people here who are you know, directors at a club or running a club that's sanctioned with Ontario Cycling that wants access to those, just let me know. We did put some links in our latest newsletter that went out to the 2024 clubs, but if you want those links, just let me know and I will get those for you. So.
Chris, a question a little bit off topic, but a little bit around insurance.
Okay.
So it might be for Brent. What about I went to Italy last year and Air Canada lost my bike, and I'm just wondering about those kind. They did find it later. I'm just wondering if there's those types of insurances available.
at this time, we unfortunately do not have. I'm going to answer that question in two parts. At this time, we unfortunately do not have any product available to cover the member bicycles, but stay tuned. That is something we're actively working on and something that we hope to be able to offer in the near future. So we're actively working towards creating a product that would cover physical damage to member bicycles. And then what is yet to be determined when we're negotiating this product is exactly how far that extends. So would it physical damage to member bikes? Absolutely. Typically speaking, if your airline loses the bike, most of the bike products that do exist in the marketplace now, for example, the one that USA Cycling has, doesn't cover that. They do have a product for the bicycles, but it still doesn't cover anything with the airline. You'd need to make a claim with the airline, which is kind of the rationale on excluding that sort of thing. So we are hoping to have a product for the member bikes, but I don't know if it would help out in that specific scenario that you just mentioned. But when we do have that product available, we'll also be ready with those answers. All
right, thanks, guys.
I have been a thorn in Brent's side about bike insurance for a little while, and it's just a matter of finding a program that makes sense. So
we're closer than we've been. So I'm optimistic.
Chris, one last question. Sorry.
Sure.
I need to email you about the other videos, but I don't see your email address here on any of the slides. Where would I get that?
It is on the website, but it's also basically just my name. So Chris, CHRIS dot B as in Bob, ASKYS at ontariocycling.org. But if you go to our website, ontariocycling.org, and go to the about section, I believe it's the very first section there where all the staff are listed with their emails and phone numbers. You can just email me, or if you call, I think I'm option 1 on the club on the OC phone directory, because I'm gonna say it's by seniority, but and not importance, but who knows. But yes, you can reach me either of those ways. Anytime, basically. I don't tend to take too much vacation, so.
All right.
If anybody else has any questions, either raise your hand, put it in the chat. If not, please don't hesitate again to email me, call me. If it's an insurance question that I can't answer, you can also email Brent, or you can just email me and I can email Brent. Sometimes the difference between what's an OC decision, what's an insurance question, what's a lawyer question or a liability question sometimes can get mumbled. So if it's a question that neither OC can answer or insurance can really answer, we can also reach out to one of the lawyers that we work with to get an answer as well on sort of liability stuff. So yeah, again, the staff is there basically for members to reach out to, for clubs to reach out to. So please make yourself please don't hide. We love to talk to people, and I love to get feedback from members. So whatever it is, good or bad, as a membership person, it's my job to allow for feedback to come in and share that with the group. Therese has another question, I think, though, so I'm gonna ask Therese to. Yeah.
Brent, when could we expect an answer on this gray matter of riding to an activity and riding home from an activity, whether or not that's covered, and which level of insurance we need to get to cover that?
I hope by tomorrow.
Okay, and where will we
I'll
find
give
that
myself to the end of the
information?
week because I'm a little bit at the mercy of the insurance company, but they've been pretty responsive on this. So
Okay, and so Chris, how will you make that information available to us?
Once I got an answer from Brent, I will email everybody that registered for this. So even those that aren't here, I'll kind of get that clarity, and I'll send everybody out an email. And then I'll see how we can try and either put it in the comments for the posted video or not. Just so that anybody who sees the video is clear on it.
I'm gonna ask the question as soon as we're off this call. 504 in BC, we might even get them today, but we'll see. Because the underwriter for this program is based out of Vancouver. But if not, I'm sure I'll get an answer tomorrow or Friday at the latest.
Okay, thanks so much.
Perfect. So if nobody else has anything, I will let everybody get on with their evening. Hopefully you took something out of this, whether it's more knowledge about the program, more confusion, unfortunately, about the program. Again, that's the whole point of these, is to try and make sure that everybody's aware of what one of the I would say one of the major benefits of having OC membership is, and that's the insurance aspect. And we're always trying to grow on those. I think, as Brent said, the bike insurance would be a huge one for a lot of people. But if you ever have feedback on anything, please let me know. I'll quickly put my email in the chat just so that for anybody who wants it, they've got it. This might upset our marketing person who won't get clicks on the website, but that'll be okay. So yeah. And Brent, if you have anything else?
Just that, we encourage questions, we encourage feedback, and we encourage ideas. It's that's how we continue to. I think Chris, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the insurance program is greatly improved over where it was when I came on board 4 years ago. And a big part of how we make those improvements to the insurance program is by getting feedback from the membership and getting questions. Because it's not everybody can think of everything. So
Yeah, and there's so
it's
many,
really helpful. And
there's so many personal or like little intricacies that change one question to the next. So what I usually tell people is if you just aren't sure, ask the question, because if it's been
Yeah.
asked before, it's an easy answer. Sometimes though, there's an activity or a little part of the question that's new that we even have to reach out for clarity on because we're not 100% sure. So, the only way for us to become more educated is to learn. So don't hesitate with those questions. Perfect. So if nobody else has anything, we will let you go, and hopefully we'll have the video out to everybody in that answer that we'll get clarity on by Friday. Worst case Monday, but we're gonna shoot for Friday for sure. So thanks everyone.
thanks, everyone.